Hi there, it's springtime, and no matter where you live in the city or country, there's probably a bird or two, or probably many, singing their hearts out. There are fluttering little wings of newly fledged birds on branches waiting to get fed by mama or papa. And this is a joyous time until, like all of us, birds venture out on their own and have to face the many challenges life has to offer. I love birds and I look forward to them every morning to start my day, and I don't think I'm alone, especially during this pandemic. Birds are found everywhere, even in big cities like New York City and Chicago. So, our topic today is about creating bird friendly cities. I am Marcia Civic, and this is Bee Provided Conservation Radio.
I think most of us maybe fall into that category where we're just happy to be sharing space and life with these amazing other creatures. And I love other things as well. This is part of a larger love of nature.
That was the voice of Tim Beatly, my guest today and author of The Bird Friendly City, Creating Safe Urban Habitats, and published by Island Press. Tim is the Teresa Hines Professor for Sustainable Communities at the School of Architecture at the University of Virginia, where he has taught for over 30 years. He is also the founder of Biophilic Cities that work with cities to connect them with nature. So welcome to the show, Tim. And I just wanted to bring up, I was really surprised when I read that you do not consider yourself a birder, and I was wondering why.
I don't call myself a birder, just partly because I don't think I probably deserve to be called a birder. I can't necessarily identify every bird, and I can't, listen to bird song and tell you exactly what bird that was. And I don't have a running list, lifetime list of birds that I've seen, but I have been a lifelong bird lover. I think that's the distinction I would make. And I think a lot of us in the world fall into that category, that we listen to birds, we watch birds, they give us so much joy and delight over the course of the day. And, that we're not necessarily, again, recognizing every bird but they're very important to us. So I think most of us maybe fall into that category where we're just happy to be sharing space in life with these amazing other creatures. And I love other things as well. This is part of a larger love of nature for me. And a lot of my professional work has been around planning and designing communities that make room for nature. And that nature's birds, but it's also other kinds of other forms of life as well.
I have to share your perspective on being a bird lover, not a birder, based on your definition. And I certainly can't go out and identify every bird and every song, but I certainly do enjoy them. And talking about nature and planning for nature and designing for nature, this brings me to want to mention in your book an example I was really impressed with, where you describe and share an example about a community coming together to put up creative nest boxes for swifts and creating an environment for them to thrive in. And so it just really isn't putting up a nest box and calling it a day. Yeah, so this community really, thought it out, had a design and plan, and thought it out for these swifts to thrive in their community, right?
And that particular story was, about a trend in the UK actually to be designing what they call wildlife friendly neighborhoods and wildlife friendly development. And so it's birds, certainly, and they've got this innovative sort of pre-designed swift brick, really, that's a brick nesting site that actually just you integrate it into the row of bricks as you're building a house.
Oh,
But
great.
that's part of, they're also thinking about hedgehogs and all kinds of other critters that you will want to make room for in your neighborhood.
I love the incorporation of nature and architecture and these different perspectives that are offered in your book with these various ways of designing a city or a building to make them bird friendly. And I'm curious, have birds always been a part of your life? I know you mentioned they were important to you earlier, But I was wondering if you could share a little bit about how birds became part of your life.
Gosh, I think for a lot of us, we've grown up watching birds, listening to birds. It certainly was my experience as a kid. I grew up in Northern Virginia. I grew up in a city called Alexandria, and I had two parents who cared a lot about nature, and I had a mom who was always filling bird feeders and always kind of paying attention to the birds around. And she was not a birder either. I don't think she would have described herself as a birder, but she cared a lot about birds, and so I got it. I think a little bit from that. I had a pretty idyllic upbringing in the sense that I lived very much in a city, but I lived in a house that was, we've called it Biophilic house today, very much embedded in a forest, and I had all kinds of nature all around me, and a small actually forest, an adjoining forest that I was able to spend a lot of time in and explore, and was able to just, the environment was such that you could walk around and you could explore the whole city on foot, and I did a lot of that. So from an early age, I think I had that connection to nature, and it's certainly shaped my professional career as well.
You mentioned the term biophilic. Can you explain to us what that is?
What is that? What is a
Yeah,
biophilic city? And
exactly. Yeah.
sure. So it of course comes from this word biophilia, which is our love of nature, love of living things. It's a term that was coined at, I have to give a lot of credit to E.O. Wilson, Ed Wilson at Harvard. He wasn't actually the first person to use the word biophilia, but he's really the one who's coined it in the way that we think of it today, which is that we are hardwired, that we have this innate connection. We're innately drawn to nature, and that we have co-evolved with nature. So to be happy and healthy and to lead truly meaningful lives, we believe that nature has to be all around us. And so when you connect biophilia with cities, biophilic cities are natureful cities. They're cities that give priority to protecting, restoring nature, instead of it being sort of an ornament or an afterthought. These are cities that put nature at the center of design and planning. And so we believe that nature has to be all around us every day, ideally every hour of every day. It can't just be something that you get occasionally on a holiday once or twice a year. It has to be all around us, where we're spending the bulk of our time, where we're spending most of our days, where we live and where we work. And so that's the key idea. We started a network of global cities called Biophilic Cities, the Biophilic Cities Network. Started that around 2013. We have 25 cities now that are officially in the network as partner cities. Happy to tell you more about that, but there's cities like Singapore and San Francisco, Toronto, Wellington, New Zealand. It's a bunch of cities that are really committed to nature and bringing nature into the center. So biophiliccities.org, if I forget to say that, that's our webpage, and the audience can find out a lot more information about the network. You can join actually as an individual. You just go online and you sign a Biophilic Cities pledge, and then you're part of our email list, and you get all the sort of materials and things, that notices and events and so on that we have.
I did check out your website, biophilic.cities.org, and found a number of really interesting short documentary films that relate to your book as well. And, particularly, what caught my eye too was the story of Portland and catios.
Yeah, so there's some things that directly relate to the book. That's
Yeah.
right. So we one of the things that we discovered was that it's very effective to do these relatively short documentary films, 5, 6, 7 minutes long. And we show up, and it's usually they're very low budget sort of films, and we just sort of ask people to tell us what's going on. And what happens is we have generated these really inspiring relatively short films. So as you say, there's one about catios. And a lot of people don't know what catios are, but that's a topic in the book. So a catio, or a cat patio, and this is something that's become very popular in Portland. So the film is about, we went to, they do this annual event called the Catio Tour. It's like a garden tour where you you drive around, you see 10 catios,
Yeah.
and you buy a ticket, and it gets you to these 10, gives you 10 different examples of what catios could be like. And so we did a little film about that event. So
Yeah, I think that's
yeah, I'm glad you found the film page.
yeah, the film page is great. So I hope some of our listeners will definitely go check that out. And I will make sure to post the link to your website and show it in my show notes for this episode. And just speaking of catios, as an aside, I live near Santa Cruz, California, and the local wildlife rehab center here gives tours of local catios, and I always think that's really cool to go check out. Yeah,
That's fantastic. So you do a catio tour
yeah,
there as
yeah.
well.
The
Wow.
native animal rescue does, I think, twice a year here,
Okay.
because as you mentioned in your book, these cats that are let outside, they kill a lot of birds. They do a lot of damage to the
They
bird
sure do.
population.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Domestic and feral cats are a big challenge for us.
yeah.
And we, as a society, we love our cats and we love our birds. And so it's, how do we, protect both?
Right.
And yeah. And so that's really interesting to hear. I know one of the things in the book is essentially what the Portland sponsors tell me, which is that they get a lot of calls from people in other cities, and that over the past few years there have been these catio events
Yeah,
and catio initiatives in other cities. So I think it's catching on, the idea. So
yeah.
that's really good to hear that there in Santa Cruz you have them
Yeah,
as well.
yeah, it's fun. Yeah, I mean, you get to see different design ideas, and I have two cats, and I don't let them outside, but they sure would love a catio. Is it true to say that birds are highly adaptable in urban settings? Like if we give them some space and some proper environment, they will adjust to the urban settings.
I think so.
Yeah,
We certainly have seen quite a bit of adaptation. Birds changing their frequencies and bird songs, the volume of their bird. But I would say that we need to do everything we can to make cities safer for birds. And there's only so much adaptation they can engage in. If bird safe windows, for example, we've got to
right.
birds have yet to evolve, and probably won't, to recognize windows as a barrier, right? So
Mhm.
it's a huge danger for them. And we have the estimates that upwards of 1 billion birds a year are killed from window and building strikes. So we can't wait for them to adapt to that. We have to adapt. We have to be changing our building codes and
Right.
changing our design standards so that we use more bird safe windows and fritted glass and window products that they can see, actually.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
you're asking about making cities, yeah, safe and hospitable, and we do need to make room for birds, and that's a key theme in the book. That there are so many ways, so many things that we can be doing, and it's everything from installing a green roof on the top of a building, that we're seeing a trend and in the direction of more of that happening, but also making sure that what gets planted on that green roof is native vegetation and
Mm.
bird supported, bird friendly. But it's also thinking about our backyards around us and planting native plants there and bird friendly plants, and trees. But yeah, doing everything we can to recognize and minimize the hazards to birds in cities, but also to incorporate those things that make it easier for those birds and safer for those birds to be around us, because we are back to the earlier point of listening and watching to birds. Our lives are so much richer and fuller and happier when we have other forms of life around us. And so that's a big part of the idea behind a bird friendly city. It's better for birds, but it's really better for human beings too.
Besides cats and window strikes, what other challenges are birds facing?
Well, there's so many
Hmm.
things, so many threats, and of course the statistics are not very encouraging. A couple of falls ago, we of course we Many of us were shocked by the Cornell Ornithology Lab study that showed that we'd lost, something like 3 billion birds in terms of abundance of birds, and a relatively short period of time since 1970. If you look globally, 40% of bird species are in decline. It's a tough time. There are so many intersecting and compounding problems. We know, of course, climate change is a big one. Habitat destruction, habitat loss. We know, that increasing use of pesticides and herbicides and an increasing toxicity connected with those things has been bad for birds, and a lot of evidence about the decline in insects and flying insects, which is major food source for many birds. So there's so many things that are negatively affecting birds. But the book is primarily about cities. Mm-hmm. And so I could answer the question a little bit, more specifically about the cities where, the threats that arise in a city. And I just mentioned, glass is a big one. Lighting is another big one. We're in the midst of our spring migration right now, and cities are these hugely lit up, sort of places, and birds are drawn into those lights and get disoriented, often fly around and are exhausted, may strike a window or a building, or may fall to the ground and find, the next morning they end up striking a window. So a huge problem is lighting, in addition to the fact that it's highly energy wasteful, and we have a huge problem with light pollution generally, and this terrible. You may in the Santa Cruz Mountains be able to see the night sky, see the dark sky, in a way that most of us don't in more urban locations. But it's a huge issue as well. So those are all things that we can do something about, though, and I think that's the big message from the book.
Definitely.
Thinking about your city, how could it be more bird friendly? It may seem like there's not much you can do to address climate change or a global, biodiversity loss or habitat loss, but there are things that we can all do locally. And those bird safe windows, bird safe building design is one thing we can do. And we can lobby our city councils to adopt mandatory bird safe design and mandatory use of bird safe windows like fritted glass. Mm-hmm. And we see cities like San Francisco is actually the first American city to adopt those mandatory requirements. But we can also turn the lights out, during migration. This is something that more than 30 cities around the country have some form of lights out initiative. Usually they're voluntary. So Philadelphia would be an example, a city that one of the more recent cities to do this. 15 or so buildings in downtown Philadelphia that turn off their lights, from about midnight to 6 a.m. when most of the migration is happening. So it's a voluntary program, but it can make a huge difference, definitely. So those are some of the threats. And I think the value of having this vision of a biophilic city and a bird-friendly city is that it guides us in this direction of things that we can do in our communities, things we can do locally that really can make a difference.
I know you mentioned that starting in your own backyard is helpful, and I always wonder about that. Is it enough when, I have this little native plant bird paradise on my little postage stamp of property, but there's no connectivity for these birds to travel through, from my neighbors to another neighbor, and I'm always curious, it seems like we do have to get planning involved, city planners and designers to help us. And how do we get our community and urban planners to start thinking in this way? And touching on a little more detail of what we can do in our own backyards.
Well, I think that your backyard is a good place to start. Okay. And in the book, there are a number of initiatives described, the Audubon groups that exist around the country have been really good at this. And there's an online Audubon database. You can type in your zip code, and it will tell you, what native plants, what plants are native to your part of the country, and
Right.
and that's very helpful in terms of knowing what to buy and what to plant. But that's a big thing that you can do, and we know that those plants and trees make a huge difference. In the book, there's some of an interview with Doug Tallamy, who's a University of Delaware ecologist, and he has done all this wonderful work looking at the connections between native plants and trees and birds, and making the very good point that native trees are so much better, for example, at providing the caterpillar density and numbers of caterpillars that nesting birds require, to support to raise their young.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it's a lot. It's, and one of my favorite trees is the white oak, which is one of Doug Tallamy's favorite tree, maybe his favorite tree. He has a new book actually about oak trees.
Oh, interesting. I have his
And
other
it's,
book.
yeah, I highly recommend his work.
Yeah.
So yes, and if you need help, that's the other part of this, is that we've got a number of organizations that are there to help you figure out what you can plant, how you can change your backyard or your front yard. So in Portland, for example, Portland Audubon has one of the largest of these backyard, certification programs, and they will come out to your house and advise you. What can you do? What should you do? What are the plans? You can get coupons that will give you a discount at the local native plant store, and then they will come back, and and there are several different levels that you can aspire to in this certification system. And so I think we need some of that. We need some nudging along, and we need some help. But if you look at the numbers, it is the case that we have millions of acres of land, in what is usually a very sterile turf grass, lawn that could be doing a lot more work for us ecologically and could be much more friendly to birds. And you asked about how to get that urban planning, how to push the urban planners maybe to thinking more about birds. I didn't really answer that question, but yeah, I don't know exactly what the answer is.
That's a big question.
Often it's a big question, and it's partly a question of politics, I think.
Yeah.
And in many cities, we have a hard time protecting trees. I think that, you've mentioned trees specifically, and I think generally we could use stronger tree protection programs and tree protection ordinances, and seen a number of places around the country and around the world. We actually have some films about this as well, and one story that I tell in the book is a story in Western Australia, where there was a highway expansion project planned that was going to essentially knock down an ancient banksia forest with huge impacts on lots of species, but birds especially.
Right.
And it took the whole community basically protesting and occupying the site, and doing what they could, saying, we don't want this, it's a highway to nowhere essentially, and we don't want to lose these trees and all the creatures that depend on those trees. So it took a political act, and it took political organizing, and in the end they succeeded, and they were able to stop the highway, and they threw out the governor, what they call the premier in the Australian system, and replaced him with a different governor and a different party. And so they were able to change the outcome through political activism, essentially. Unfortunately, they were moving so quickly ahead with this highway project that they cut down a lot of trees. So they were not able to save all the forest, but they saved a lot of it. And I think that's partly what we have to do. And maybe it's making the connections between trees and birds. If we love birds, then we've got to think about changing what we plant in our gardens, in our yards. And we've got to think about protecting trees. And in particular, I think we increasingly realize that it's saving those existing mature trees, those older trees that sequester so much carbon, are really important strategy from a greenhouse gas or a climate change mitigation perspective, but also very important for birds. So I'm not quite sure what the answer is. I do think that we need to incorporate more birds need to make their way into local plans and planning systems in a way that they don't yet. If you were to sort of look randomly select comprehensive plans or general plans, as you call them in California, if you did word searches, you probably wouldn't be much reference to birds. But it doesn't have to be that way. And in the book, I highlight a few examples. Cities like Vancouver, for example. Vancouver has even a bird strategy for its city. That's so right. A standalone bird strategy. That's pretty unusual. And a bird committee, basically, that advises the city about bird steps that are needed to protect and conserve birds. So there are a lot of ways that we could be better incorporating birds into our planning systems.
Well, I think your book is a great place to start and a resource for people to become educated about all these things. And just a little plug for you and your book. I should mention you can buy the book at islandpress.org and search for Bird Friendly City. And there you can use a discount code, which is BEATLEY, to order a book. And I believe it's a 10% discount code. So that's a little plug for you, Tim. And, I was curious, are you seeing more interest in nature in these urban areas based on your various interactions with people in governments while you were working on this book?
Yeah. I see more of it, but it may just partly be that I'm looking for it and encouraged by it. And, I'm optimistic. I do think, and you mentioned the pandemic in the beginning, and I do think that's one of maybe the lasting effects of being so long in a sort of lockdown mode. Birds especially have been a saving grace. They've been a balm, a salve for us, a point of normalcy maybe in our lives when so many other things are topsy-turvy, right? So the birds are still singing and the birds are still migrating. And so I think that, and the evidence suggests that if you look at this, the sales have gone up for bird feeders and downloads of bird identification apps and things like that, and internet traffic to sites like Audubon gone way up during the pandemic. And I get a lot of people telling me about how they're paying more attention to nature generally, but birds in particular. And so I do think that will carry over and will continue. It bodes well, I think, for as we're beginning to get out of the pandemic, at least in this country. Will we carry with us that newfound love of nature, that care for nature, that importance of birds? And I hope we will.
I hope so.
And I think we will. And maybe this is the basis for a new level of political activism. So we make sure we don't allow we protect those trees, and we make sure that city council adopts that bird safe design ordinance, and we do everything we can, to make our cities bird friendly.
Well, I'm happy to hear that you now have 25 cities in your network of biophilic cities. So that's a great start, and I assume you're looking for more cities to join. Yeah.
So if anybody is listening from a city that you think would like to be part of the network, let me know.
Yeah.
Send me an email. But most of the cities, there's a little bit of a bias towards North America and Europe, but we do have a city in India. We have a city in Australia. I mentioned New Zealand.
Singapore,
we hope to have some Chinese cities. Yeah, Singapore. Yeah. And we hope to have cities in Africa as well. We don't have any yet. We've probably had conversations with 100 other cities about joining. So we hope that this is gaining traction and that we're going to expand this network. And so these are cities that are committing basically to putting nature at the center, and that includes birds. So these,
Perfect.
I'm hopeful because these will be cities that, and already many cities that are, that care about birds and doing what they can to protect birds.
Well, in regards to your book, Tim, I was wondering if there's anything else you would like to talk about and let our listeners know a little bit more about your book.
Gosh, I mean, it's meant to tell stories of things going on around the country and around the world. So probably most of the examples are North American. So we a lot of discussion about Toronto and a wonderful group called FLAP that's done so much work there to raise awareness about birds and bird window strikes, and working to actually the first city in North America to adopt minimum bird safe standards was Toronto. But
Wow.
so Toronto, but then also international examples. So I mentioned the example from Australia.
Mm-hmm.
There's also a chapter about Singapore and their really interesting approach to bird conservation, story of the hornbills, and these really interesting high-tech artificial nesting boxes that they have installed, and really wonderful story of bringing back the hornbills to this pretty dense island nation, city state. So it's a little bit about London. I mentioned the common swifts in the UK, and so a little sampling about bird conservation things going on in cities around the world.
Well, besides the book, The Bird Friendly City, I know you have authored more than 15 books that people can use as resources out there, as far as natural hazard planning and environmental values and ethics and such. So yeah, thank you for all the work that you do, and thank you for being on the show today. It was wonderful talking to you, Tim.
Thank you for having me on the
Yeah.
show.
Well, folks, this concludes today's show with Tim Beatly, author of Bird Friendly City. Remember to visit islandpress.org and use the discount code, which is in all caps, and it is the author's last name, which is BEATLEY, when you order a copy of the Bird Friendly City. I am Marcia Civic, and this is a production of Be Provided Conservation Radio. Today's music is by Adrian Wolf and is titled For the Birds. Please visit www.beprovided.com for more episodes like this and to see pictures of Tim and his book, as well as get the link to order his book along with the discount code. So thank you for listening today, and stay safe and stay healthy.